Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to do the capital budget today. Typical procedure is that the subcommittee reports out to the public, and then they usually at a different time report back to the full committee. We're still going to have that procedure per se, but we're going to do it all together in an effort to save some time. So I'm going to turn this over to the Capitol Chair, Senator Zucker, and his subcommittee will vote out. So when the votes come for that, the subcommittee will vote. And then we will subsequently vote as full committee. Mr. Chair?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, this is the Subcommittee of Capital meeting on the capital budget. Before we start, and I'll have more remarks later, I just want to again thank the amazing team on capital budget, as well as our amazing teammates with Department of Legislative Services. Colleagues, I did want to flag that, this is an important day. We're rolling out the capital budget, and we did it. We delayed a little bit the capital budget so we could perfectly make sure it happens on Matt Klein's birthday. So, Matt, happy birthday. There he is. So, Matt, I bet you this is the best birthday present you could get. But
every year.
Every year. But with that, I'll turn it over to the analysts, and we'll get started.
All right, where you have two documents in front of us today, there is a white decision document and a yellow additional page document. We're going to start going through the white document in budget code order with our first analyst, Laura Hyde.
So starting on page 1 and 2 for the Interagency Commission on School Construction, the first two actions are related. The DLS recommendation was to reduce the Healthy School Facility Fund by $45 million and use the remaining funding in fiscal 27, which is the second action for the pre-authorization for that amount. The agency disagreed on both actions. The first house rejected.
So we're going to concur with the House. Any opposition? Okay, next.
Turning to page 2 and on to page 3, this is additional first house action for the Supplemental Capital Grant Program. The House added language on local cost share and adopted.
Okay, there's a motion to concur. Any objection? Okay, next.
On page 4, for the Department of Disabilities, DLS recommendation was to approve the general obligation bond authorization for the Access Maryland program. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Okay. Motion is concur. Any opposition? Okay, thank you.
On page 5 in the Historic St. Mary's City Commission, DLS recommended adopting narrative requesting a report on site improvements, encumbrances, and expenditures. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Okay, motion to concur. Any opposition? All right, next.
On page 6, for the Board of Public Works, the DLS recommendation was to approve all GO bond authorizations, pre-authorizations, and amendments to prior authorizations for DGS. The agency concurred, but the House rejected and instead increased funding for the Revolutionary War Memorial for Black Soldiers project by $250,000.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject DLS and concur with the first House action.
Is there any opposition? Okay.
On page 7 for the Judiciary, DLS recommended reducing $25 million for the new Supreme Court of Maryland building. Agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
Okay. Any opposition? Okay, we concurred.
All righty. Also, the first House added language to extend the termination date or two separate termination dates for grants to the new Catonsville District Court project.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
Lastly, there is language here to pre-authorize, or the allowance included $81.4 million as a pre-authorization for the new Supreme Court of Maryland building. This was increased to $111.4 million by the first House.
Concur.
Good.
Moving on to page 11, the military department, DLS's recommendation was to approve all GO bond authorization and pre-authorization. The agency concurred, the first house rejected because there is an additional first house action that adds an authorization to begin the design for the new joint forces headquarters.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject DLS and concur with the first House action.
Any opposition? Okay.
Okay, our next page is the Department of Veterans and Military Families. DLS's recommendation was to approve all GO bonds for the department. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay, concur.
On page 13 in the Department of Planning, DLS had recommended approving all authorizations and amendments to prior authorizations, and the agency concurred. However, the first house adopted an additional action to extend the termination date for certain bonds.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject DLS and concur with the first House action.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page 14 is Department of Information Technology. DLS's recommendation was to approve all GO bonds for the department. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Okay, any opposition?
Page 15 for the Maryland Department of Transportation, the recommendation was to approve all authorizations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay, concur.
On page 16 is the Department of Natural Resources. Department of Legislative Services recommended approving all authorizations in the proposed pre-authorization. The agency concurred. First House rejected this action to add $8,727,000 for the Summers Cove Marina Bulkhead Replacement and Facility Improvements Project.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject DLS and concur with the first House action.
Is there any opposition? All right.
On page 18, in the Maryland Department of Health, DLS recommended approving all authorizations, pre-authorizations, and amendments to prior authorizations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Department of Public Safety and Corrections.
Hold on, I'm sorry, hold on.
Sorry.
No, you're crushing it.
Concur.
Is there, any opposition? You're as fast as I am, I appreciate it. Okay, any opposition? Okay, go ahead, please.
Great. Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, pages 19 through 21. DLS had recommended approving all authorizations, pre-authorizations, and amendments to prior authorizations. The agency concurred, and the first house rejected and instead adopted 3 additional actions. Action 1 reduces the fiscal 26 funding for the Baltimore Therapeutic Treatment Center to provide only the funds necessary to start construction in May of 2026.
Okay.
The House adopted.
Okay.
The second action is related to this. It increases the pre-authorization for fiscal 27 by that $46 million that was pushed out of fiscal 26, and the House adopted that as well.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject DLS and concur with both first House actions for the Baltimore Therapeutic Treatment Center.
And then turning to page 21 in the Division of Corrections, the New Life Skills and Reentry Center for Women received an additional $1 million from the House for their fiscal 26 authorization.
Mr. Chair, if we can modify the first House action to add an additional $1 million in funding for the New Life Skills and Reentry Center for Women.
And that's it for public.
Any opposition? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
On page 22, for the Maryland State Library Agency, DLS recommendation is to approve the general obligation bond authorization for the Public Library Capital Grant Program. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page 23 for UMB, the first recommendation is reduce GO funding for the School of Public Social Work and to be replaced with special funds. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
The second action adds from the first house, adds language extending the termination date for the GO bond funding for the Central Electric Substation and Electrical Infrastructure upgrade.
Concur.
Any opposition?
On page 24 for University of Maryland College Park, the first recommendation was to defer $7.5 million of funding to fiscal 27. The agency disagreed and the House rejected.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
The second recommendation was reducing the GO funding for the Zupnik building to replace with special funds, and the House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? So just so people listening, so there's House actions and there's agency recommendations, House actions. So when we say concur, we're concurring with what the House did. And what I'm doing is providing an opportunity for the subcommittee, if they object to that motion, they should speak up. Right now, there's been no dissent on that, so that's how we're going through it so quickly, just so people know. Please.
Okay, on page 25, the first House Act added $2.5 million for the new Health and Human Services Science Complex.
Concur.
And any opposition? Okay.
Okay, turning to your goldenrod package on page 14. This would add a pre-authorization in a 27 for graduate student housing at College Park in the city of College Park.
Senator Rosepep, you okay with the $5 million pre-authorization from College Park? Okay. Okay. Any opposition? Great. Adopted. Thank you.
And if you can move forward to page 2 in the colored package, the goldenrod package. This would add $1 million for infrastructure improvements at Frostburg State University for their baseball complex.
Adopt.
Any opposition? Okay.
Back to the white packet on page 26, we have Bowie State University. DLS recommended approving all authorizations. The agency concurred in part, requesting an additional $8.5 million, and the first House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page 27, the Townsend University, the recommendation is to reduce GO bonds for Smith Hall renovation by $9 million for the Green Energy Initiative to be replaced by the Strategic Energy Investment Fund. The agency concurs and the House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay, thank you.
There is an additional action to provide $300,000 for Cook Library renovation. The House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
In the yellow additional packet, page 1, the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, the recommendation is to provide $500,000 for the new resident hall preliminary design.
Adopt.
Any opposition? Okay, thank you.
In the white packet, page 28, the Salisbury University, DLS recommends to approve all GO bond authorizations and pre-authorizations. The agency concurs and the House rejects for an additional action to reduce GO bonds by $5 million for the Green Energy Initiative to be replaced by the Strategic Energy Investment Fund.
So, Mr. Vice Chair, just so I can let people know, so we're just doing fund swaps. We're not making actual cuts. So we're making sure that we're not making any cuts here. Just a transfer of money, Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, concur with the House to reject DLS and adopt the additional first House action.
Any opposition? Okay.
Back in the white packet on page 29, we have University of Maryland Global Campus. DLS recommended approving all changes to prior authorizations for the university. There was no response and the first House adopted. However, there's an additional item for your consideration on page 15 of the yellow packet, adding $3.2 million fiscal 2027 pre-authorization for the Delphi building renovation.
Mr. Chair, if we can reject DLS and adopt the fiscal 2027 pre-authorization in the additional packet.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page 30 for UMBC, the DLS recommendation was to approve the authorization and pre-authorization. However, the House added $530,000 for a new synthetic track. And they also, on page 31, added $5 million for a new student service building.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject DLS and adopt the first House action on page 30, and if we can concur on page 31.
Is there any opposition to those two actions? Okay, thank you very much.
On page 32 for University System Maryland office, the recommendation is to approve the general bond authorization, pre-authorization, and approve all the academic revenue bonds.
Concur.
Any opposition?
On page 33 for the Baltimore City Community College, item 1 recommends deleting funds for property acquisition. The agency disagreed and the first house adopted.
Concur.
There is an additional recommendation for your consideration, page 16 on the yellow packet. This adds
On what
a
page,
fiscal.
please?
Page 16.
16, thank you.
Yeah. This adds a fiscal 2027 pre-authorization for the same project.
Senator McCray?
Mr. Chair, if we can adopt the additional yellow page.
Okay, any opposition? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving back to the white packet, item 2 authorizes 9 million. Page 33 of the white packet.
White pack. Page 16. Pre-authorizing.
Pre-authorize.
If Senator Benson's happy, we're all happy.
Okay. If you move to the white packet on page 33, item 2, this authorizes 9 million in general obligation bonds for deferred maintenance projects. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page 34, in the white packet, this is for Maryland School for the Deaf. The DLS recommended action was to approve all general bond authorizations and pre-authorizations. The agency concurred and the first House adopted. However, there's an additional page, page 3 in the packet for your consideration, to add $750,000 for facility renewal on the Columbia campus.
Adopt.
Any opposition to adopting? Okay, adopted.
Okay. Page 35 on the white packet for the Maryland Higher Education Commission. DLS recommendation was to approve all authorizations and pre-authorizations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
On page 36 is Morgan State University. DLS recommended reducing GO funding for the new science center, replacing it with the C fund. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Concur.
There's an additional item for your consideration on page 4 of the yellow packet. It adds, it restricts funds, put in a report on the redevelopment of the Lake Clifton site.
Mr. Vice Chair. Okay. Any opposition to adopting? Okay, adopted.
On page 37 of the white packet, under the University of Maryland Medical System, DLS recommended approving all authorizations. The agency concurred, the House adopted. But there is also an additional item for your consideration on page 5 of the gold packet. This would add $130,000 for an apheresis machine at the University of Maryland Medical System.
Adopt.
Senator Jackson, you okay with this? I'm good with that. Okay. Any opposition? Okay, adopted.
On page 38 for the Department of Housing and Community Development, the first item regards the Baltimore Regional Neighborhood Initiative. DLS had recommended reducing the amount by $15 million, and the agency disagreed. However, the first House modified, only reducing by $9 million, as well as restricting $3 million, $3 million in funding for burning. However, there's an additional action on page 6 in your yellow packet. This action increases the amount restricted from $3 million to about $7.6 million. And it starts on page 6 and goes all the way to page 9.
Can we modify the House actions with the additional pages that he just referenced?
Is there any opposition? Okay, adopted.
Moving on now to page 40 for the second item regarding the Business Facade Improvement Program. DLS recommended eliminating funding for the business facade improvement program, and the agency disagreed, and the first house rejected.
Concur.
There's a motion to concur. Is there any opposition? Okay.
There's an additional first house action for the National Capital Strategic Economic Development Fund. This action increased funding by $6 million and restricted $4 million for specified projects. There's an additional page as well on page 11 of the yellow packet. This action in the yellow packet restricts $8 million to specified projects.
Mr. Chair, if we can modify the House actions with the page in the additional packet that he just referenced.
Any opposition? Okay, adopted.
Moving on to the third item on page 42 in the decision document, the white packet. For the C Community Development Anchor Institution Fund, the recommendation was to direct DHCD to use $5 million from the C Community Development Anchor Institution Fund to fund the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore Strategic Operations Center. The agency disagreed, and the first house modified. And that modification is on page, page 43 going to page 44. What the first house modification did was restrict an additional $2.5 million.
Mr. Chair, if we could modify the House's action to increase the IonQ capital of the Quantum Initiative.
Is there any opposition? This is a big step for Maryland, by the way, the IonQ, and I know that the chair has talked about it, and we'll hear more about it later, but this is an important investment from the state.
Moving on to the next action on page 45 for the Strategic Demolition Fund. This action restricts funding for specified projects. There's an additional page, additional item on page 13 in the yellow packet. This action adds an additional $2.5 million to be restricted for specified projects.
Mr. Chair, if we can modify the House actions with the additional page that was just referenced.
Is there any opposition? Okay.
Moving on to page 46 for the rental housing programs. This action restricts $3 million for a specified project.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page 47 for the Housing Innovation Fund, this action provides $5 million for the Housing Innovation Fund.
Concur.
And the first house adopted.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page 48 for the Partnership Rental Housing Program, this action reduces funds by $2 million to reallocate to the Housing Innovation Fund, and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
There's one more additional item on page 10 in the yellow packet. This one's for the Community Legacy Program, and this action restricts funding for specified projects.
Adopt.
Any opposition? Okay.
Back in your decision document on page 49, DLS recommendation for the Department of Commerce was to approve the GO bond authorization. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Any
Page 50.
opposition?
Page 50 for the Department of the Environment, DLS recommended approving all authorizations for the Maryland Department of the Environment. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition?
Page 51 for the Maryland Environmental Service, the DLS recommendation was to approve all authorizations and pre-authorizations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition?
The Department of Juvenile Services appears on page 52. DLS recommended approving the authorization and deauthorization for the department. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
The Department of State Police appears on page 53. DLS recommended approving all authorizations, deauthorizations, and pre-authorizations. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
The miscellaneous grant program begins on page 54. These are the governor's projects as introduced. The first one is the Adventist Health Newport, Washington facility. DLS recommended cutting $2.5 million to that project. The grantee disagreed. The first house modified it to add $2.5 million for a total of $5 million.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject DLS and adopt the additional first House action.
Any opposition?
For the Baltimore Museum of Art. Oh.
What's that, Senator? I'm sorry. Okay.
All good? Okay. For the Baltimore Museum of Art Fire Suppression Capital Improvements, DLS recommended reducing $750,000. The first house rejected.
Concur.
For the Bowie Mill Bike Trail, DLS recommended deleting the $2.1 million authorization. The first house rejected.
Concur.
Any opposition?
For the Downtown Partnership of Baltimore Strategic Operations Center, DLS recommended deleting $5 million as that funding can come from the Department of Housing and Community Development Seed Community Development Anchor Institution Fund. The first house adopted.
Concur.
It's just a fund swap. Any opposition? Okay.
Moving to page 56, item number 5. For the Glen Echo Park Spanish Ballroom renovation, DLS recommended deleting the $1.5 million authorization. The first house rejected.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
For the Inner Harbor Promenade, the first house, so the initial introduction was $38 million. The first house reduced $3 million of that authorization.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
For the Luminous Health Doctors Community Medical Center, new obstetrical care tower at the top of page 57, the first house added $10 million to bring the project to a $20 million authorization.
Concur.
Any opposition?
For number 6, in the middle of page 57, for the Port Discovery Children's Museum, DLS recommended deleting the $2.5 million authorization. The first house rejected.
Concur.
Item number 7, at the bottom of page 57, Salisbury Regional Airport new hangar project. DLS recommended reducing $750,000. The first house rejected.
Concur.
Okay.
For the item number 8 on page 58, the Westport Capital Development Cloman Street relocation, DLS recommended deleting the $1 million authorization. The first house rejected.
Concur.
Okay. Any opposition? Okay, rejected. Good.
For item number 9 on that same page, page 58, for the Maryland Independent College and University Association, the recommendation was to approve all authorizations. The agency concurred but requests an additional $3.96 million. The first house adopted.
Concur.
Any opposition? Okay.
On page, beginning on page 59, for the Maryland Hospital Association, these are on pages 59 through 62. DLS recommendations 1 through 12 are to delete funding for projects with the state funding percentage less than 15%. The agency disagreed and the House rejected all 12 recommendations.
Mr. Chair, if we can concur with the House to reject all the DLS recommendations for the Maryland Hospital Association.
Any opposition? Okay.
There's also an additional page for your consideration on page 17 of the yellow packet. This action adds a fiscal 2027 pre-authorization of $20 million for the Maryland Hospital Association.
Adopt.
Any opposition to pre-authorizing $20 million for the Maryland Hospital Association? Okay.
That takes us through both of the white document and the yellow. However, you have some additional sheets in front of you. Those include a green packet.
Can we make sure we hand them out?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be a good time. The green packet, a blue packet, and a pink packet.
Okay, hold on, let's get it out to the public. They have it already? No, they don't. Yep, green, blue, and red. Whatever's public, let it be public. It's a transparent committee. So we'll wait till everyone gets one, or enough people get one, and then we'll start. Okay, we took a little bit of pause just to allow people, the public, to get the documents that we're going to go through, so it's transparent. Please.
All right, the green packet in front of you is the miscellaneous tally sheet. This includes all of the governor's miscellaneous projects, all of the House's miscellaneous projects, and all of those added by the Senate or proposed to be added by the Senate. This includes changes made to governor's projects. I believe there are 3 on the first page, an additional $2 million for the Howard County New Cultural Center, an additional $250,000 for the new Edgewater Community Center, and removal of $4 million for Viva White Oak, as during the discussion of the White decision document, funds were provided in DHCD instead for that project. There's also changes made to projects that were added by the House on pages 1, 2, and most of the way through page 3, with the last House project that was added being ZA00DK. That's what's in the green packet.
Does anyone have questions for me or the analyst about the green packet? Okay.
Okay. The pink or salmon page in front of you is the miscellaneous tally sheet. The House had pre-authorized one project. The Senate's proposed miscellaneous pre-authorizations are in the rightmost column.
Any opposition to adopting page green or salmon colored page?
Nope.
Okay.
Finally, there is a blue packet in front of you with legislative bond initiatives. This includes funding that was provided for projects that were considered House initiatives, as well as Senate initiatives in the middle column, and total amounts in the third or rightmost column.
Adopt.
Okay. Motion to adopt the blue packet. Any opposition?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay, is there any questions about anything that's been handed out? Is there a motion to move the adoption of the subcommittee? Yes. Why don't we take it offline? Is that okay? Okay. Is there a motion to adopt subcommittee report?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to adopt the subcommittee report.
All in favor? Second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Okay, thank you very much. We'll report, it's being reported out to full committee.